The drought had gnawed at the Kansas plains for months, leaving the soil cracked like old porcelain and the wind tasting of dust and resignation. On that sweltering August morning, the men digging out the abandoned well behind the Hargreaves property expected nothing more than brittle stones and the occasional snake. What none of them imagined was the small splash of color waiting in the darkness below, a smudged patchwork doll, her button eyes dulled by decades underground. Sheriff Walter Briggs stood at the edge of the well, the sun casting a heat-warped halo around his hat brim. The doll lay on a canvas sheet, misshapen and damp, as if time had tried and failed to erase it. Walter didn't need the murmurs around him to understand what the men were thinking. In a place like Dunstable County, memories clung to people the way dust clung to boots, and everyone remembered the missing girl. Her name was Emma Caldwell. She had vanished 22 years earlier, swallowed by a night the whole county pretended had been ordinary. The old sheriff, Byron Coates, had insisted there was no crime, no evidence, no reason for alarm. Children wandered, children died, children were sometimes simply taken by the land. That was the story he'd given, and few dared contradict the man who kept order in a place that rarely understood the difference between law and fear. Walter crouched, brushing his fingertips lightly over the doll's frayed yarn hair. It felt colder than it should have in the relentless heat. This wasn't here by accident, he murmured, half to himself. The foreman cleared his throat nervously. Sheriff, we weren't looking for trouble, just clearing space for the new irrigation line. You didn't find trouble, Walter said softly. You found history. Around them, the men exchanged glances, edged with unease. Nobody wanted to be the one who suggested aloud that the doll might belong to the girl no one discussed anymore. Farms were failing, tempers were short, and some ghosts were thought better left alone. As Walter gathered the doll into an evidence bag, he felt the wind shift, not a breeze, but a subtle drop in temperature, the kind that moved across a man's skin like a warning. He looked up to see Mrs. Iris Hargreaves watching from her porch, her gloved hands clasped tightly enough to whiten her knuckles. She had lived in this county longer than nearly anyone, but she did not step forward, nor did she pretend curiosity. She stared at the doll as though recognizing it, then turned abruptly and disappeared inside her house. Walter filed the moment away. In Dunstable County, silence often carried more truth than confessions. Later that afternoon, he drove the doll back to the sheriff's office, the dirt road shuddering beneath the tires. The office still smelled faintly of Byron Coates, old tobacco and leather polish, though the man himself had retired the year before. Walter had taken the job reluctantly, more out of duty than desire. This wasn't the kind of town that welcomed change, and he wasn't the kind of man who could ignore what he saw. He placed the evidence bag on his desk, studying the uneven stitches and faded pattern on the doll's dress. Not the sort of toy that wandered into wells on its own. Someone had put it there. Someone who didn't want it found. The phone rang suddenly, slicing through the quiet. Walter lifted the receiver. Sheriff Briggs speaking. A long pause. Then a woman's voice. Thin, trembling. You found it? Didn't you? Walter straightened. Who is this? But the line clicked dead, leaving only the low hum of empty air. He stared at the receiver for a moment, then returned his gaze to the doll. A sharp unease settled in his chest. The call had come too quickly. The voice had known too much. As the evening sun bled orange across the plains, Walter locked up the office and stepped outside, the cicadas screaming like restless bones in the grass. In the distance, smoke from a farmhouse chimney curled upward, dissolving into the sky. Everything looked ordinary, but nothing felt ordinary. And behind him, through the office window, the evidence bag holding the doll shifted slightly on the desk, just enough to make the lamplight catch one of its button eyes, giving it the illusion of watching him leave. He did not see it, but someone else standing in the deepening shadows across the street did. The next morning, a low fog clung to the wheat fields like a shroud, muting the colors of the Kansas plains. Sheriff Walter Briggs drove slowly down Main Street, noting how early risers seemed to avoid his eyes. The discovery of the doll had traveled faster than gasoline rumors, faster even than drought gossip. People in Dunstable County had a way of knowing things they pretended not to talk about. He parked outside the small diner, where the smell of frying bacon mingled with the scent of damp earth. The bell jingled as he stepped inside. Conversations dipped, if only for a heartbeat. Walter ignored it and headed straight for a corner booth occupied by Earl Wexler, one of the few remaining men old enough to remember the Caldwell family in their prime. Earl lifted his coffee mug in a tight greeting. "Sheriff?" "Morning, Earl." Walter slid into the seat across from him. "I need to ask you about Emma Caldwell." The old man's jaw stiffened. For a moment, he simply stared into his cup. Some stories ought to stay where they lay, and some don't, Walter replied calmly. A toy found in a well isn't just a story. Earl's breath rasped faintly. His farm had been failing for years. Hardship carved lines across his face like dry riverbeds. "Folks said things back then," he murmured. "Things Byron Coates didn't care to hear. Man thought rumors did more damage than truth. Did you ever see the doll before? The one we found yesterday?" Earl hesitated, then nodded once. A small, reluctant dip of the chin. "Emma carried it everywhere. Her mama stitched that doll herself. Pretty little thing, always patched, always loved. When the girl disappeared, well, Byron said the doll must have gone with her. But she didn't go anywhere," Walter said quietly. "Somebody put that doll in the well." The diner fell unnervingly silent around them. Earl closed his eyes as if the weight of unfinished years pressed against his bones. "Ask her mother," he whispered. "If she'll talk. If she'll talk." The phrasing lingered. Emma's mother, Caroline Caldwell, lived on the outskirts of town in a house that seemed to shrink into itself more each year. Walter drove there after leaving the diner. The Caldwell property was surrounded by withered hedgerows, the gravel drive littered with wind-blown leaves. The front porch sagged under the age of secrets. He knocked. The door opened a crack. Caroline Caldwell, once a striking brunette rumored to have charmed half the county's men, now appeared hollowed by time. Her eyes, pale as washed linen, drifted immediately to the evidence bag in Walter's hand. "You shouldn't have brought that here," she whispered. "Mrs. Caldwell," Walter said gently, "we need to talk about your daughter." Her face contorted, grief battling fear in a silent war. "I told the sheriff everything I knew in 1930. No one believed me then. They won't believe me now." "What did Sheriff Coates ignore?" Walter pressed. Caroline's fingers trembled as they rose to her lips. She looked down the hallway behind her as though expecting someone, or something, to reappear from the shadows. "Emma didn't wander off," she said softly. "She was taken. And Byron told me to keep my mouth shut, said I was hysterical, said the county didn't need more trouble." "Taken by who?" Her answer came as a broken whisper. "A man who had no right to be near her, a man people respected far too much." Before Walter could ask more, a loud thump echoed from deeper inside the house, followed by the unmistakable creak of a floorboard. Caroline flinched violently. "You need to leave," she said, grabbing the door. "Please, before he knows you're here." "He?" Walter repeated. "Mrs. Caldwell is someone else in the house?" Her eyes pleaded with him. "Go." She shut the door hard enough that dust shivered from the porch rafters. Walter remained still for a moment, listening to the thick silence. His instincts prickled with unease. He stepped off the porch and circled toward the side of the house, but the curtains were drawn tight, the windows reflecting only his own shape back at him. A storm was building. One he sensed had started long before he'd taken the badge. As he returned to his car, he caught sight of something in the dirt. A single footprint, small enough to be a child's, though softened by time. The tread was wrong, outdated, like something from decades ago. Walter knelt, fingertips brushing the impression. Behind him, a curtain in Caroline Caldwell's house shifted slightly, though no breeze touched the air. Someone had watched him kneel, someone who should not have been small enough to leave that footprint. The next days dripped by with the slow tension of a tightening rope. Sheriff Walter Briggs found himself waking before dawn, paced by a growing sense that the county was shifting under his feet, realigning itself around the old wound he had reopened. The doll, now sealed in a cabinet within the sheriff's office, seemed almost to radiate unease, an artifact that had waited too long for someone to listen. Walter began with the county archives, a cramped room in the courthouse that smelled of mildew and paper decay. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as he sifted through brittle folders stamped with dates from Prohibition and the Hoover years. Sheriff Byron Coates had kept immaculate records when it suited him, and glaringly incomplete ones when it did not. Emma Caldwell's missing persons file was thin, too thin. A brief statement from Caroline Caldwell, a single interview with Emma's father, Luke Caldwell, the wealthiest landowner in the county at the time. A short note from Byron. Child presumed deceased. No signs of foul play. Case closed. Walter tapped the paper with his knuckle. There were no witness logs, no canvas reports, no map of the search radius. It was as if Byron had written the ending long before the story even began. He noticed something else. A slip of paper tucked between two unrelated folders. A page torn from a child's diary, the date scrawled at the top. April 3rd, 1930, 3 days before Emma vanished. The handwriting was small, careful, unmistakably young. Mama cried again last night. I don't like when she cries. I heard Papa talking to Mr. Hargreaves. They said I shouldn't play near the well anymore. They said it isn't safe because of what he did, but they won't tell me who he is. Walter felt a chill slide across his shoulders. Mr. Hargreaves, the same family whose property the well sat on, the same family whose matriarch had stared at the doll with a recognition she refused to voice. The diary page had been deliberately separated from the file. He needed more. Something official. Something Byron couldn't bury with a careless stroke of his pen. In a locked cabinet at the back of the archive room, Walter found Byron's private incident logs, handwritten notes, some coded, some crossed out with angry slashes. Walter flipped through until a name caught his eye. Reverend Amos Hargreaves, the pastor, a towering figure in county history, known for sermons that stirred both devotion and fear, dead now for over a decade. Byron's notes were sparse but suggestive. Complaint filed by C.C. Ree, A.H., follow-up denied by counsel. Family influence too strong, no further action. Keep quiet. Walter stared at the initials. C.C., Caroline Caldwell. A.H., Amos Hargreaves. He leaned back, breath unsteady. If Caroline had accused Reverend Hargreaves of something involving her daughter, and Byron had buried it, the weight of the discovery pressed hard against his ribs. He returned to the Caldwell property just before dusk. A sense of foreboding clung to the place. Shutters closed tight, the air stagnant. He knocked. No answer. The house seemed abandoned, though he'd seen a lamp burning in an upstairs window earlier that morning. He circled around to the back where an old root cellar stood partially collapsed. Among the debris, something caught the fading sunlight, a cracked wooden box coated in dust. Inside it lay several objects, a length of fraying ribbon, a child's mitten, and a little book covered in blue cloth. Another diary. Walter opened it carefully, the spine brittle with age. The first few pages were harmless recollections, a girl describing her lessons, her chores, her pony. But the entries grew darker as he read. Papa says the Reverend is a good man, but I don't like when he visits. He looks at me too long. Mama says never to be alone with him, but Papa gets angry when she says that. Another page. Mama told Papa that the Reverend shouldn't come here anymore. Papa yelled. I heard something break. I hid in my room. Mama told me to stay close to her. And finally, the last written words. I saw the Reverend near the well today. He was watching me. I think he wants me to follow him, but Mama says not to. I'm scared. I don't think Mama can keep me safe. Walter felt the ground tilt beneath him. Caroline hadn't been hysterical. She'd been silenced. As he closed the diary, a low creak echoed from the cellar doorway. Walter turned sharply. The door, which had been half collapsed, was now open wider, as if nudged by an unseen hand. Inside, the darkness seemed to pulse. A faint outline shifted within it. Small. Still. For a moment, Walter thought it was just debris, until it moved again. And something about its size, its quiet, hesitant sway, felt impossibly familiar. Night had fallen by the time Sheriff Walter Briggs left the Caldwell property, but the image of that small shifting shape in the cellar doorway stayed branded behind his eyes. He told himself it had been an animal, a raccoon perhaps, but the lie did little to settle the cold crawling across his spine. Something in that darkness had watched him, something that moved with the careful hesitation of memory. Back in town, Main Street sat quiet under a moon carved thin as a sickle. A few storefront lights glowed, soft halos trembling in the drifting dust. Walter parked near the sheriff's office and stepped out, the dry wind carrying whispers from the wheat fields beyond. He tried to shake the feeling that the entire county was listening. Inside the office, he found Deputy Tom Harden sitting at his desk, hat tipped low, boots crossed. Harden was young, too young to have lived through the Caldwell disappearance, but he carried the county's fear the way others carried their faith. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Harden said. Walter didn't answer at first. He moved to the cabinet, withdrew the blue cloth diary, and placed it on the desk between them. "Read the last 3 entries." Harden did. As his eyes moved, his posture stiffened. "Jesus, Reverend Hargreaves? Looks that way." Harden exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "My dad said the Reverend had a temper, but he never heard nothing like this. People don't talk about the things that shame them," Walter replied. Harden lowered his voice. "You think the old sheriff knew?" "I think he buried everything that didn't fit the story he wanted." The younger man swallowed hard. "Sheriff, if this gets out, there are families in this town who will come apart." Walter closed the diary gently, as if it were something still alive. Then maybe they should. That night, he drove to the Hargreaves homestead, a sprawling estate once ruled by Reverend Amos with iron sermons and Sunday terrors. The house now belonged to his son, Samuel Hargreaves, a landowner known less for piety and more for fearsome debts. The moon lit the fields in silver haze as Walter approached the gate. A single lantern burned on the porch, casting a long, thin shadow of a man sitting in a rocking chair. Samuel Hargreaves rocked once, twice, then stilled. "Evening, Sheriff," he called, voice slow and wary. Walter stepped forward. "Your father had dealings with the Caldwells. I need to ask you about those." Samuel's expression tightened, though he attempted a smile too stiff to be sincere. "My daddy had dealings with every family in this county. He baptized them, disciplined them, buried them. Folks begged for his guidance. And feared him," Walter added. Samuel's eyes flicked sharply upward. "Some men deserve fear." Walter sensed the brittle pride beneath the words, the kind that fractures before it bends. He showed Samuel the diary. The man didn't touch it, didn't even look at it long. "Old lies," Samuel muttered. "Women get frightened, make accusations. Children misinterpret. Daddy was a man of God. A man of God who visited a little girl alone, who stood near the well where her toy was found." Samuel leaned forward, voice low. "You stir up things that been settled, Sheriff, you'll bring heat to people who don't deserve it. My family's name still carries weight." Walter held his ground. "That weight is exactly what I'm questioning." Feigning exhaustion, Samuel rose from the rocker and extinguished the lantern. "Go home, Sheriff, don't dig where the soil's still tender." But as Walter walked back toward his car, he noticed something. The tracks in the dirt. Small ones, barely visible in the moonlight. The same size as the footprint outside Caroline Caldwell's house. Children didn't roam these grounds, not living ones. The next morning, Walter was jolted awake by pounding on his door. Harden stood outside, breathless. "Sheriff, wake up. There was a fire." Walter dressed quickly as Harden explained. The library room in the courthouse where the archives were kept had burned during the night. Not the whole structure, just the cabinets containing decades of county records. "Someone torched Byron Coates's files," Harden said, trembling. "Everything related to the Caldwell case is gone. But not the diaries, Walter thought. Not the things they hadn't expected him to find." He left immediately, the rising sun tearing open red streaks across the plains. Townsfolk gathered outside the courthouse, whispering fearfully as smoke drifted from broken windows. Walter stepped inside. The archive room was a ruin of ash and melted metal. Paper had curled into fragile, blackened petals. As he sifted through the debris, something glinted beneath a charred beam. A brass button, a single, small button. A child's button. Walter crouched. His heartbeat fluttered painfully in his chest. Those buttons matched the ones on Emma Caldwell's doll, but the doll was locked in his office, and when he rose to his feet and turned toward the doorway, he froze. Someone stood there, watching him, a figure no taller than a child. And as the smoke curled around it, he could swear it lifted its hand, as if beckoning him deeper into the ashes. For a moment, Sheriff Walter Briggs could not breathe. The courthouse air, thick with smoke and the bitter tang of burned paper, clung to his throat as he stared at the small figure framed by the doorway. It didn't move, didn't speak, only watched him with the stillness of something suspended between presence and memory. Then a gust of wind pushed through the broken window, stirring the ash. The figure dissolved into shadows, slipping away as if it had never existed at all. Hardin rushed in behind him, coughing. "Sheriff? You all right?" Walter forced himself to nod. But something primal inside him whispered that the county's secrets were no longer content to stay buried. They were beginning to walk. He left the courthouse with the brass button clenched in his fist. It felt warm, too warm for something pulled from cold ash. Walter slid it into his pocket, though the weight of it seemed to drag against his ribs. There was only one man left who could answer the questions tightening around his throat like a rope. Former Sheriff Byron Coates, the man who had signed off on the disappearance with the certainty of someone who expected no challenge. Walter drove to Coates's farmhouse on the northern outskirts, where the dry wind whipped the fields into restless waves. The house stood squat and weather-worn, its porch sagging under the weight of years of unspoken truths. Coates opened the door before Walter even knocked, as if he had been expecting him. "You've been stirring up ghosts." His voice was gravel, his stare a cold accusation. "Ghosts don't burn archives," Walter replied. "People do." Coates stepped aside. Walter entered a dim parlor that smelled of stale pipe smoke and old regret. There were no family photographs, no decorations. Just a single wooden chair angled toward the window, where Coates liked to watch the world without participating in it. "You ignored Caroline Caldwell's complaint," Walter said. "You buried evidence. You let an entire county believe that a little girl wandered off." Coates's jaw twitched. "You don't know what that girl's disappearance nearly did to this place. You weren't here." "That's exactly why I can see it clearly," Walter said. "You protected someone." The old sheriff's silence was confirmation enough. Walter pressed on. "Reverend Hargreaves, what did he do?" Coates's eyes fixed on the horizon, where a storm brewed in bruised purples and grays. "Men like Hargreaves didn't answer to sheriffs," he murmured. "He answered to the men with land, with money, with influence. I was told to stand down, to keep peace, to keep order." "And Emma Caldwell?" Walter asked, voice low. Coates swallowed hard. "She saw something she wasn't meant to see, something the Reverend did. Her father, Luke, knew. They all knew." "Where is she, Coates?" The old man's hands trembled. "I don't know. I swear it. But I know this. After the Reverend died, the land felt different, calmer, as if something had finally stopped looking for her." A chill spread through Walter's stomach. "Who burned the archives?" Coates exhaled slowly, painfully. "Someone who never wanted the truth to breathe again." Lightning cracked across the horizon, briefly illuminating the room. In that flash, Walter noticed something he hadn't before. A small footprint in the dust on the floorboards beside the window, just like the prints outside Caroline's house, just like the ones on the Hargreaves property. Coates noticed Walter staring. His voice broke. "Sometimes, I hear her. At night. I think she wants someone to finish what I failed to do." Thunder rolled. The farmhouse seemed to groan with it. Walter stepped toward the window and froze. Out in the field, illuminated by the storm's flickering light, stood a small figure. Still, silent, watching the house, Emma's size, Emma's shape. And as the wind bent the wheat in long, trembling waves, the tiny figure raised one arm, slow, deliberate, pointing not at the house, but at the old well on the Caldwell property miles away. A pull, deep in Walter's chest, answered that silent summons. "Do you see her?" Walter whispered. Coates did not lift his eyes. "I've been seeing her for years." When Walter turned back toward the field, the figure was gone. but the direction it had pointed remained carved into his mind like a promise, or a warning. Something waited at the bottom of that well, something that had never left, and now it wanted to be found. If this story left you wondering what truly hides beneath a quiet town surface, don't forget to leave a comment, share your theories, subscribe to the channel, and hit the like button to support more stories like this one. Your engagement keeps these forgotten histories alive.